Okay, well, we're at the end of what seems to have been quite a long day, so hopefully we'll have a few people online as well as in the room. So Stuart has asked me just to do a brief introduction to this keynote speech. I don't think really Steve himself needs much of an introduction, but perhaps just to say a little bit about the journal. So my name's Beverly Stevenson. I'm an Associate Dean in the faculty, but for many years was a member of the law school, and was here in the law school when discussions were had about starting a journal. And I have to confess, I was a little bit sceptical. I thought, well, it's going to be hard to get people to contribute. The law school was much smaller then. There were perhaps around 20 staff. I thought some staff won't want to contribute. Those who want to publish may want to go to external journals, because that's a kind of avid kudos. I thought, well, okay, we've got it off the ground. No, it's not going to keep going for that long. So on one of those things, I was so wrong. And that is that here we are 25 years later, which I think is just, a fantastic accomplishment. But on the other, I think I was right. It was very hard. It was very hard to get it going. And it's been for certainly the early years, I can't speak for the later years, but it was very hard to keep this going. And it was Steve who kept this going for the law school. So I think it's really fair to say that while Steve had other colleagues and editors along the way, that to keep this going for 25 years took a lot of drive and commitment. And for the law school, that drive and commitment came almost exclusively, I feel, from Steve. And he has led it for 25 years. So I think not only is this really a great accomplishment for the law school and the university, but it's also a real personal achievement for Steve. So I think what I would like to say, Steve, is, thank you on behalf of the law school and the university for all you've done in keeping it going. I think it's, a really great achievement. So well done. And I'll hand over to you to talk about your understanding of how it went.
Yeah, I'll bring you back to a conversation we had in the staff meeting where I just started the journal and I was keen to get contributors and I wasn't getting many contributors. And I said, I think you may have been head at that time, or you were course leader. And I said, well, I think there should be a rule that everybody should contribute at least one thing per year. And you said, no. And that wasn't because you were being obstructive. I just think we were very busy with teaching, and scholarship or publications just wasn't a big thing. It was also quite ironic that I started it in 1996 because I'd had a sort of almost 10 or 15 year gap in writing, because I got involved in course administration, course leadership, and there wasn't any room for it. And I suddenly started getting involved in case notes again, and then, typical of me, said, well, if I'm doing it, everybody else is doing it. But why did we start the journal? Well, I thought it might engage our students a bit more if we could feed them recent legal developments. There were things like the Student Law Review, which were published 3 times a year by, I think it may have been the equivalent of Routledge then. But copies were just being left unread in the foyer, and we thought, well, if we have our own law journal and we could feed that into our teaching, that would be useful. And it got me publishing and writing again, and I thought we might be able to do that with other members of staff. But yeah, it's been a delight that it has continued. You're right, Deb, it was very difficult at first, particularly 2 issues a year. And sometimes I had to fill that with my own book reviews and case notes, etc. It is now a lot easier because we've got student contributions. They're very keen to publish. We've got publications from outside, not only from overseas, but from other university lecturers. And of course, we've got staff now who are expected to publish. almost all the staff we get are from PhDs, so it is a lot easier. But what has been nice over the years is that I've got people publishing where I basically said to them, why wouldn't you want to publish? Why aren't you thinking about how this law should be developing or whether that case was right or not? And it was always a mystery to me that people didn't want to write that. And I appreciated that it was difficult getting the stuff out there where strangers might read it. Because as lecturers, we're always right, the students are always wrong. We're always in an elevated position. And it's easier to teach students. But when, of course, you start writing, and that's going externally, particularly when we put it on Westlaw, people are a little bit concerned. So I'd like to say a couple of things about who's contributed or what type of people have contributed. Staff, obviously, have contributed, and I think almost without exception have felt the benefit of it, and have felt relieved when it happens, and they're relieved that they're not going to get a deluge of criticism, and I think they've got a lot of pride out of it. So I think it's grown scholarship in the Coventry Law School in that way. It's nice when you get external contributors. We've got them from Nigeria, and I think we've got a couple of Nigerian contributors speaking tomorrow. We've had High Court judges. We've had people from the profession. We had Lawrence Fick today, who I always know as Larry. I didn't remind him today that 40 years ago he tried to cross the river on a very wobbly branch in Kenilworth Park and landed up in the soup. And I was going to ask him the question, what on earth made you think you were going to get across that river without going into the soup? But it's nice to remember those people as students, but tremendously, you get tremendous pride, not only when somebody becomes really successful in their profession, and we've had lots of those, but he must look back with tremendous pride on the type of work that he's done in medical negligence, because all lawyers have clients and you take pride in your client, but that type of client who've lived through a human dilemma, it must be brilliant to look back and say, I've helped those people. So that's always nice. But as I say, High Court judges, it was nice to see both Chris and Nicola Monaghan from Worcester, so that other people from other institutions have come and joined in. We discovered another Steve Foster last issue. A lot of people thought that article about the Human Rights Act was written by me. It wasn't. There's another Steve Foster who works at Manchester Grammar School and has written a book on judicial protection of civil liberties. So that was nice to make contact. So it's lovely to see that we've got those contributions from outside, from other academics and people involved in the profession. And of course, it's also great that it's now on Westlaw. We approached Westlaw some 10 years ago, but we managed to backdate right to 2000. So most of the journal is up there. And that leads to the other contributors, and that's students. We've always tried to encourage students to produce their best work and get it published. And that's usually dissertations from master's students, but not always. And then we've expanded that by setting students assessments on the basis that the best ones are going to end up in the Coventry Law Journal. And that inspires a great deal of pride and care in their work, and it's great on their CVs. And there's always a bit of jostling as to, can I get the work done and published? So that's been really great. So it's fantastic. We've got a wide selection of contributors. In terms of my own contributions, I probably had about 150 or so. I have shamelessly always duplicated stuff which I've published in other journals. So I just changed the title. In fact, I think the British Tax Review, or whoever we published that case note on, did notice that and say, well, Steve, you've already published this in the Coventry Law Journal. How much of it is different, etc. So yeah, I've written on a wide number of areas, and book reviews, case notes, recent developments, and journal articles, etc. Because once I got that bug back, and I acquired that bug in 1981 when David Royal was head of law, and he was the journal editor of the Law Teacher, and he used to get staff to write book reviews, etc., and recent developments, and you'd hand something in and you'd hand it back with all these grammatical changes, etc. And then I thought, I wonder if I'll be doing that in 10 or 15 years' time, and I have been doing it for 30 years. But that's where I got the bug, and I was allowed to get back into it in 1995, 1996, and since then have published a lot. But I'm not going to go through all 150 articles or case notes, you'd be glad to know, but I'll choose 2 or 3 areas. One I was very interested in was the ban on homosexuals in armed forces, because I'd written an article about the domestic proceedings in that case, and we were just on the cusp then of passing the Human Rights Act, and I found that case infuriating in the domestic proceedings because I could see no rationale for it. Just to recall that there used to be an automatic ban on homosexuals serving in the armed forces, so that you couldn't join the armed forces if you were known to be homosexual, and if you were discovered to be homosexual, and sometimes that was by nasty means, you were automatically discharged. And the English courts, although sympathetic, said, well, this isn't a question of the right to private life because Human Rights Act wasn't in force then. We would have to prove that it was irrational for the ministry to continue this particular policy. And they've just had a referendum on it in the armed forces, and surprise, surprise, 90% said we'd rather not have homosexuals in the armed forces. I've always felt that if I was a fellow soldier, I'd rather have a gay soldier who can shoot straight than a straight one who can't. That argument obviously wasn't put forward in the Court of Appeal, and I was frustrated by the English attitude towards civil liberties, because something which was obviously wrong and irrational and bore no relationship between any harm at all was allowed to continue purely because it was convenient or people couldn't bother to change the rules. So when that case went to the European Court of Human Rights, and they said, well, private life is engaged, and you've got to show not just a rational reason, a legitimate aim, and it's got to be proportionate. And this wasn't proportionate. There was no relationship between the ban and any harm that could possibly be caused in the armed forces. I thought, well, passing of the human rights should really strike gold, in the sense that it should lead to much more rational judicial making and hopefully legislative making, and that certain policies would not be considered now, which were considered before. And I wrote a lot about, because the European Court wasn't doing everything in terms of sexual orientation, sexual equality. For many years, it didn't accept that there could be transgender rights, there could be transgender marriages or same-sex marriages, but we've moved on from that. So I've been happy to argue for that development. And unlike a lot of frustrated academics today, where nothing has happened, things have happened. I'm not saying because of my articles, but because we've moved on as a society, and that was really gratifying to see that the Human Rights Act was having an impact. The other 3 that I would choose, the right to die, again, is one which frustrates me, in the sense that I can't see any reason why the law shouldn't change. And the law hasn't changed because the judiciary say, well, it's up to you to change the law. And they haven't taken the initiative there and said the law is discriminatory and the law doesn't have due regard to self-determination and private autonomy. And the European Court agrees with that. And that state of non-movement, I think, is frustrating for somebody who is seeing human rights being violated without really a strong reason. And I hate that when a court, whether it's European or domestic, shows a judicial deference or a margin of appreciation purely on the basis that we're not going to interfere. There are situations where they have interfered, detention without trial, abortion rights where they've trod on the government's toes, civil partnerships, etc., where they have been prepared to take the initiative and not show judicial deference. So that's kept me busy for 20 years because this is a battle which still hasn't been won. Obviously, prisoner voting rights kept me very busy, and prisoners' rights has kept me busy for 30 years. And I think the first thing I wrote for the Coventry Law Journal was the rule of law and prison administration. And I've seen a massive change since I was a student, a lecturer, and now in prisoners' rights, prisoners' family rights, liberty rights, release and recall, which Gary was talking about yesterday. Fascinating stuff. But prisoner voting rights, the saga of it, we still didn't get a satisfactory ending. And in one way that was great because it allowed me to keep writing articles every time there were judicial challenges. But again, very legally frustrating in the sense that the law stayed the same simply because it was politically convenient for politicians to say, don't worry, public, we are not going to change the law. David Cameron saying, the idea made him physically sick. Good. And in that sense, it saddened me when the law was changed, not by statute, but by prison service orders, simply to allow people who are on release from prison in the final stages of their sentence, only those people could vote. And that saddened me that they felt that was a satisfactory response. And what saddened me further was that the Committee of Ministers in the Council of Europe said that that is a satisfactory means of satisfying the European Court's judgment. And that pusillanimity saddened me in many respects. The other area I've looked at is press freedom and celebrity privacy. And it's allowed me to report on privacy cases brought by my heroes and brought by my arch villains, Cliff Richard, etc., by people we're not allowed to mention because there's an anonymity order on that, but and brought a case in privacy. And I've written a lot about that because I have 3 issues about privacy actions being brought by celebrities. One, whether they really deserve the right of privacy given their public nature. 2, whether it's wrong to dismiss a public interest defense purely because it's a matter which interests the public rather than of pure public interest of constitutional, social, political importance, etc. I feel that if people have enough interest to buy newspapers and follow these matters, there is, as Lord Wolfe said in the A&B PLC case, a real and genuine public interest. That doesn't mean to say that you can ride roughshod over people's privacy simply because they're public figures, but I think they have to give up a lot. And the third aspect that I find difficult to grapple with is that given the social media and the prevalence of social media, everybody knows these secrets anyway. And that was the I won't mention his name. That's the case that everybody knew that he'd had an extramarital affair. They were talking about it, and everybody knows, but they maintain the injunction because, well, this is different because the press are going to make a meal of it, and they're going to cause greater distress, etc. And I think, again, that goes back to the question of how the public and how the judges perceive press freedom. And press freedom is fine as long as you're exposing politicians and talking about wider intellectually more public interest matters, but it's not their job to get involved in tittle-tattle. And I don't fully accept that. So that's always been a matter of interest to me. And they've probably finished now. I'll move on to something else, but that's allowed me to look at those particular areas. So it has been a bit of a ball, actually, over 25 years. It's great fun. Editing, etc., inviting people, but particularly students, because I am, at the end of the day, I'm not an academic. I'm a legal journalist, and I'm a teacher. And the idea that students are writing now is great because I can feed that into teaching, and I can say to them, when you write an essay, don't just write it for me. You're writing it for an audience, whether that's a client in a problem question, or you're imagining you're writing a blog entry or a short story or an article, etc. And you've got to take pride in what you're saying, and you've got to take great care in what you're saying and how you express it, etc. So I think if there's been one, major beneficial result, it's been that. It's enhanced, I think, student skills. I think we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So I think I'll leave it at that particular point. And I'll pick up on it again tomorrow when we talk about enhancing legal student skills in legal writing by setting assessments. The final point, I'd obviously like to thank Stuart for doing all the technical stuff today. But what I would note today is the quality of the presentations, and sometimes we forget how brilliant we are at presenting and what brilliant presenters we are. I'm not. When you look at Lawrence, it was very emotional. It was very emotive, and it's taken up 20 or 30 of his years of service, etc. But I'm going to pick somebody out. The clarity of Alan East's presentation was absolutely staggering, and I think students do appreciate that we really are professionals. And when you start writing and publishing, you take more care in what you say and how you say it. And if the Coventry Law Journal has done that, then that's fantastic. I was very proud of a lot of people who got up there and in 15 minutes, and it's not easy, spoke very eloquently, very clearly, and showed that they were great professionals. So thank you to them. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Steve. I think it's really great to hear that you feel one of the benefits has been students, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. I also thought Alan's presentation was great. And the fact that, I first met him as an 18-year-old student. And now I look at him and think of the experience he's had, how eloquently he presented, and just think, how people have developed. And that as a law school, we are part of that first step in helping them do that. I think to have people come back and then to see that, as you said, it's really fantastic.
Yes, and it's been a great day, and it'll be another great day tomorrow. And again, thank you, Stuart, for all you've done today.
Thank you all. Thank you, everyone online. Tomorrow we have a panel, well, we have another keynote speaker joining us from Australia, bright and breezy at 9 a.m, Professor Michael Adams, followed by a panel on international and comparative law, and then we're going to wrap up with a bit of discussion about legal education and publishing. So it should be something for everyone. So thank you all. See you all either face to face or online tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart.